and we're sorry about the technical difficulties. Larry had a bit of trouble connecting this morning, but thank you all for hanging tight with us. This is the first press conference of the Recall Newsom Elect Elder campaign. We've talked to a number of you during this campaign already. The topics we are going to go over today, there are some topics we're going to emphasize today, and they are crime, anti-Asian violence and racism, as well as racial preferences and critical race theory. Obviously, what we're trying to do in this campaign is that we want to talk to all Californians of all stripes, and there are some issues that affect some communities in our state more than others. In the coming weeks, we will be reaching out to more communities, talking about even more issues that affect different groups. But this press conference here is obviously open to all members of the media. We have today here with us Betty Chu, who is one of our ardent supporters. We're very proud to have her support. Let me just give you guys the rundown of what's going to happen. Betty is going to introduce Larry. Larry will then offer his remarks on the topics that we're focusing on today. We will then have a Q&A session with members of the media. And for those of you who wish to ask a question later, I will let you guys know when that time is, and you can raise your hand on Zoom, or just type in the chat function that you're interested in asking a question. But we will do that after Larry provides his remarks. So without further ado, let me introduce Betty first. Betty is the former mayor of Monterey Park in Southern California. She is a trailblazer in so many ways. She is one of the first Chinese American women to pass the bar in the state of California. She is the first Chinese American woman to run a bank. In the 2020 election, she was the honorary co-chair of the No on Prop 16 campaign here in California. And what's most important to us is that she's a proud supporter of the Larry Elder campaign. And so I will hand it over to her for her to introduce Larry.
Thank you, Ying, and good morning, everyone. And in particular, we are so delighted to welcome you, Larry Elder, into our different communities all up and down California. As many of you know, Gavin Newsom's leadership failures have caused many California businesses to close, small businesses to close permanently, and residents to flee the state of California, this wonderful golden state. Newsom, in particular, as it relates to our community, Newsom signed anti-Asian legislation, such as Proposition 16 and critical race theory. These have added to the explosion of anti-Asian hate, violence, and crime in California. This is the worst that I have seen against our Asian community in my 80+ years. And furthermore, it has been the worst that I have seen economically in our community in my 80+ years. Larry has had a fantastic career, and a career over the past 30 years. So we know where you stand, Larry. You have been an attorney and are still licensed as an attorney, best-selling author, an award-winning filmmaker, and most notably, a nationally syndicated talk show host with your own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Well, you know, your current political positions and solutions have been for many, many years. You have stated it on your show over and over again against all sorts of criticism and hatred. They were known years before this election. And these solutions that you have talked about are practical to turn this state around to be golden again and addresses all of Newsom's failures. Because I believe Larry would be the best recall gubernatorial candidate, I sued the Secretary of State to make sure that you were going to be on the recall ballot to save all of our constitutional rights, each one of your constitutional rights. He is the only viable candidate, and I have read all the statements in the official voter guide. You are the only viable candidate who has the strength of convictions, the depth of solutions, and the most pervasive and persuasive voice of reason to save California. We cannot wait any longer for additional, what I call Newsom disasters. Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, Independents, Green Party, all of us alike, blacks, whites, browns, yellows alike. We are united in knowing what the problems are. So we should unite together to have the only person that can solve most of the problems that Newsom has created to our disadvantage. Let us all unite together, regardless of our party preferences, regardless of our racial differences, and our racial unity, to vote yes, yes on recall, yes on Larry Elder. Vote, vote, vote. Thank you, Larry.
Oh,
I give you the floor.
Thank you, Betty. Larry, please.
Betty, thank you so much for that. I think after I become governor in this election, I think I found my running mate when I run next year. Anyway, thank you very much for that wonderful, wonderful introduction, Betty. The reason I'm running is because of the reasons that Betty just outlined. We've got all sorts of problems in this state. Many of them have been exacerbated by this governor in the last 2 years. The reason I got into this race is because I was really quite concerned about the way this man shut down this state in the most draconian way compared to the other 49 states. A third of all small businesses are gone forever. Many of those businesses are owned by racial minorities. And he did this against science. He was sitting at that famous French Laundry restaurant with the very same people that drafted the mandates, and he was not wearing masks. He was not socially distancing. His own kids enjoyed in-person, in-school, private education, while he denied the same opportunity for the public school students here in California. 80% of the public school students in California are Black and brown students, and these are the ones that people on the left claim that they really care about. It's estimated that around 75% of all Black boys in public education in California cannot read at state levels of proficiency, and those levels are not high. It's estimated that nearly 50% of third graders cannot read at state levels of proficiency. Again, those levels are not high. I went to an inner city high school, Crenshaw High School, and I just checked recently, only 2% of kids at Crenshaw High School are math proficient. I support choice. I support true choice, and that includes the ability to put your kid in a public school should you choose to, a private school, a religious school, or a charter school. Polls show that the majority of Black and brown parents living in the inner city also support school choice. The teachers union is adamantly opposed to school choice because if you endorse school choice, the teachers do not automatically become members of the union, and they don't get those automatic dues. I saw a study some years ago by Fordham Institute that looked at where public school teachers send their own school-age kids. Nationwide, roughly 10% of families send their kids to private school. Roughly 6% of Black families do. However, 44% of Philadelphia public school teachers with school-age kids put their own kids in private school. The number for Chicago public school teachers was 39%. And here in Los Angeles, at the Los Angeles Unified School District, a public school teacher with school-age kids is twice as likely to have his or her own kids in private school. Now that's equivalent of opening up a restaurant, holding up a sign saying, come on in, eat the food, but my staff won't eat it. It is outrageous. The first step towards leaving poverty and getting to the middle class is making sure you have a decent high school education one where you can read, write, and compute at grade level. And all too often, the students that do graduate from our urban high schools cannot do so. And that is why when they go to a junior college or a four-year school, they often have to take remedial math and remedial English. The largest funder of Gavin Newsom is the teachers union. And as I mentioned, they are adamantly opposed to school choice. For that reason, I believe I'm going to be able to attract a lot of Black and brown voters that Republicans in the past have not been able to attract. But the other reason I'm joining this campaign and seeking to recall Gavin Newsom is because of the rising crime. We've had rising crime in Oakland and in San Francisco and in Los Angeles and in San Diego for a number of reasons. Most notably, I believe the false allegation that the police are engaging in systemic racism. The allegation pushed by people like Black Lives Matter and many people on the left argue that the police are using deadly force against Black people just because they're Black. And the studies have shown for decades that is not true. There's a very long article in the Washington Post. You will note during this conversation, I often try and use left-wing sources so that people on the left can't say I'm full of it. But there was a long article in the Washington Post, April 27, 2016, research going back over decades showing the police more hesitant, more reluctant to pull the trigger against Black suspects than white suspects. However, if you're a cop, particularly if you're a white cop, why run the risk of being falsely accused of systemic racism? As a result, the police are engaging in what is now called passive policing as opposed to proactive policing. It's called the Ferguson effect or the George Floyd effect, where the police pull back and just answer radio calls. They don't get out of the car and investigate suspicious activity because much of police work is discretionary. And so you have the discretion to sit in your car and just answer radio calls if you want. And this is what is happening all throughout the country. Rahm Emanuel, the former mayor of Chicago, even said the police had, quote, gone fetal, close quote. His expression, not mine, because of the false allegation of systemic racism. Then we have a couple of soft on crime district attorneys. One is in San Francisco and one is in LA. Both have been funded by George Soros. George Soros's fingerprints are not on the one in San Francisco, but George Soros affiliated and sympathetic groups have helped to fund this man, and that is why he's there. And you also have the phenomenon of, since Gavin Newsom has been in office during COVID, 20,000 prisoners have been released early, supposedly because of compassionate release. Many of these are violent offenders, and statistically, they're more likely to reoffend. What could possibly go wrong? Just recently in Oakland, former Senator Barbara Boxer was mugged, her cell phone was taken, and just days earlier, the Oakland Police Department chief complained about money being diverted from his police department being spent for other programs, excuse me. And in Los Angeles, about 150, excuse me. And in Los Angeles, about $150 million have been diverted from the police department for so-called social programs. Social programs which would not be necessary if over the last several decades, the nuclear intact family had not been destroyed. I've argued that in 1965, when Lyndon Johnson launched the so-called war on poverty, 25% of Black kids were entered the world without a father married to the mother. Now that number is close to 70%. And Barack Obama once said, a kid raised without a father is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. There is a connection between the welfare state and the growing number of children who enter America without fathers. Now 25% of white kids are now born without a father married to the mother. That was 25% of Blacks in 1965. It was single digits for whites back in 1965. So there's been an explosion of white children entering the world without a father married to the mother. Nearly 50% of all Hispanic kids enter the world without a father married to the mother. And now 40% of all kids in America enter the world without a father married to the mother. There's a direct relationship between that and crime. And Barack Obama once said, as I said, a kid raised without a father is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school. Again, 20 times more likely to end up in jail. I repeat that because this is a left-wing guy, Barack Obama, who once wrote his book called Dreams of My Father, where he talked about the angst that he felt because he didn't have a father. When we talk about things like homelessness, I think it is important to talk about root causes. The left, like Kamala Harris, love to talk about root causes when it comes to illegal immigration. That's why she was down in Guatemala looking for root causes. Well, there's a root cause of homelessness as well. In California, the population of Blacks, excuse me, is 6.5%. However, it is estimated by HUD that 40% of the homeless population is Black. Again, there's a direct connection between the breakdown of the family and the rise of homelessness. Speaking of homelessness, there has been a credible rise of homelessness, and the way that the Newsom administration and the Democrats in Sacramento, and they're dominated by supermajorities of Democrats, is to have a housing first policy without dealing with the underlying reason why so many people are homeless. And the dominant reason is because of mental illness and because of substance abuse. Unless you deal with the mental illness and the substance abuse, simply building homes, by the way, at a much greater cost than the private sector would build, is not going to do anything. We should get churches involved in this. Government has proved it cannot do it. Get churches involved in getting people motivated, giving them spiritual revitalization. And after that, we need to have lots of low-cost housing, something that has been stopped because of the California Environmental Quality Act and the environmental extremists that seem to feel that anytime you put a spoon in the dirt, it has an adverse environmental impact. And as a result, we have a shortage of homes in California. The average price of a home in California is $800,000. The average price of a home, again, $800,000. That's 150% more than the average price of a home in America. And according to Leo Hanian, he's an econ professor at UCLA, one of my frequent guests on my radio show, excuse me, the average price of a home in California is 50% more than it would be but for these environmental rules and regulations. I'm so sorry. One of the many things I intend to do when I become governor is to declare a crisis on homelessness and unleash the private sector to build low-cost housing. Many projects are being stopped because of lawsuits, and many developers are not even trying to build property because of the fear of the lawsuits. I'm going to change the attitude when I get there. We also talked about the way this man shut down this state against the medical advice. We have the phenomenon of yet another possibility that we may even face more mandates, including face masks and vaccines. If I become governor, when I become governor, assuming there are mandates for masks and statewide mandates for vaccines, they will be suspended right away. This is America. We have freedom in America, and virtually anybody in California who wants to be vaccinated can do so, and people who are poor can be vaccinated for free. I have been vaccinated. I'm going to be 70 years old in April, and I have other comorbidities, including a blood condition. My doctor strongly advised me to get vaccinated, and I believe vaccines work, and I believe if you're in a high-risk category, you should be vaccinated. But there are many Americans who disagree with me, who feel that the vaccine was done too quickly. And many Americans, frankly, listened to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris when they both advised people not to trust Donald Trump, and that if Donald Trump recommended that you take the vaccine, I'm not going to take it. Kamala Harris said that twice, including during a debate. So crime, homelessness, the rising cost of living, the way the Gavin Newsom has failed to thin the trees, and he promised to do so. And he claimed that he had thinned a certain number of acreage of fallen dead trees and dry vegetation. And it turns out he misled Californians by a factor of 7. Now, as to the Asian American community in particular, I want to say a couple of things. Proposition 209 was passed back in the 90s, and it outlawed the use of race and gender in areas of public contracting, in areas of government hiring, and in areas of admissions to colleges and universities at our state schools. It turned out that after 209 went into effect, the percentage of Asian Americans at the two most competitive UC campuses, UCLA and Berkeley, substantially increased. The percentage of Black and Brown students decreased, but the percentage of Black and Brown students at the overall UC system did not go down. It turned out that Black and Brown students instead went to UC Riverside or UC Irvine, less competitive campuses, and by the way, were more likely to graduate on time. The ethnic group that really got shafted were Asian Americans, because the percentage of Asian Americans at UCLA and Berkeley substantially went up, which meant that lesser qualified Black and Brown students were taking the place of more qualified Asian American students, and that is simply unfair. The rationale behind using race is to have diversity, but discrimination, to fight discrimination historically, is still discrimination, and it's unfair. Arguably the most prestigious and best public high school in California is Lowell High School. For years, Lowell High School required an admissions examination. They've now eliminated that because the student body at Lowell is roughly 60% or more Asian Americans, and that was not deemed to be sufficiently diversified. That to me is an attack on merit and is an unfair attack on qualified, hardworking Asian American students. Not just here in California, the same thing is happening at arguably the finest public high school in America, which is Thomas Jefferson High School of Science and Technology in Fairfax, Virginia. Similarly, roughly 60% or so of the student body, Asian American, and that was deemed to be unfair, not sufficiently diverse. And now TJ has now gone away with having an admissions exam. And this is now to the detriment also of Asian American students. My opponent supported Proposition 16. Proposition 16 would have repealed Proposition 209, so now they could go back to using race as a factor. The no side defeated the yes side, even though the yes side outspent the no side almost 20-1. Again, had that gone through, the persons that would have been hurt the most would have been Asian Americans. There's also been a rise in hate crime against Asian Americans. And we don't have a lot of hard data on it, in my opinion, because newspapers like the Los Angeles Times does not want to report the fact that a disproportionately high number of the perpetrators of these crimes against Asian Americans happen to be Black. I do know that last year in New York, there were roughly 20 people who were arrested for committing anti-Asian hate crimes. Only 2 of them were white, even though the town is over 50% white. So the dirty little secret is that a lot of Asian Americans are being attacked by Blacks, and the newspaper wants to underreport it because they don't want to make Black people look bad. But we don't get anywhere without telling the truth. Malcolm X once said, "I'm for the truth no matter who is telling it." So for all those reasons, I'm running for governor. I hope to replace Gavin Newsom for crime, for homelessness, the outrageous cost of living, and the way this man shut down the state while ignoring science. One more thing, regarding people leaving California, as Betty pointed out, for the first time in our state's history, I think we're 170 years old, there is a net migration out of California. And these are not millionaires and billionaires that Bernie Sanders likes to speak about, although some have left. People who are making between $50,000 and $100,000 a year are leaving. And they cite the number one reason for leaving is the high cost of a home. They can't get that first home. So they're going to Tennessee and Florida and Texas. And many of my friends living in those states tell me, why do people from California leave and bring their left-wing policies with them? And that is because they haven't connected the dots. They don't realize there's a reason for the outrageous price of homes, and the reasons are left-wing policies. There's a reason for the rise in crime, and it's left-wing policies. There's a reason for the rise in homelessness, and it's left-wing policies. A lot of people haven't connected the dots, and I'm capable of connecting the dots in a way that I think the average Californian can understand, and that's why I believe I'm going to win this election after Gavin Newsom is recalled.
Okay, thank you, Larry. We now move on to the Q&A session, but before we do that, I guess I was incredibly rude earlier. I forgot to introduce myself. I think most of you already know me. I'm Ying Ma. I'm the Communications Director of the Larry Elder campaign. For those of you who wish to get more information about our campaign, please go to electelder.com. Again, that's electelder.com. We've got quite a few of you attending this press conference, and I know a lot of you would like to ask questions. Here's what we're going to do. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand on Zoom, or you can go to the chat function and tell us who you are, what media outlet you represent, and let us know that you would like to ask a question. And so what we're going to do now is that we are going to open it up. Again, if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand on Zoom, or go to the chat function, tell us who you are, what media outlet you represent, and that you would like to ask a question. Our first question goes to Kathy Zhang of The Sound of Hope. And Kathy, if you'll bear with us for just a moment, you'll be on screen very soon, and if you could unmute yourself, please go ahead and ask a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, Larry. Thank you. I'm Kathy Zhang with the Sound of Hope Media Group. So my question is, among all those problems that California is facing, in your opinion, what is the most fundamental problem? And how would you address it if you are elected to the governor?
Well, I think the most fundamental problem is the most fundamental job of government, which is to protect people and property. And I would say the rise in crime. What I would do, of course, is to use my bully pulpit to defend the police against allegations that they're engaging in systemic racism. So they go back to proactive policing. The proactive policing stops crime in many ways. Once you become passive, bad guys know it, and crime goes up. And I would certainly support the recall elections of the two assistant DAs that I just now mentioned in San Francisco and in Los Angeles. I would not be releasing prisoners early the way Gavin Newsom has done. And according to the Associated Press, there's something like 75,000 additional prisoners who are eligible for early release over the coming months and coming years. I would reverse that policy as well. I also think that we need to build enough prisons to store people who committed bad things. One of the reasons that the prisons have been thinned out is because of so-called prison overcrowding. I think people who commit crimes should be put behind bars for the length of their sentences, and I'm going to be tough on crime. So those are some of the things I'm going to do.
Okay, can I have a follow-up question?
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
so in regards, you also mentioned that Proposition 47, since it's passed, a lot of the law enforcement agencies, they do admit it kind of hindered how they enforce the laws, and the public are also very concerned. But the issue is the Proposition 47 was passed by the voters in California. So,
right.
Yeah, so what's your opinion on this?
Well, I wouldn't say that the police say it sort of hindered them. I'd say it hindered them a great deal. I spoke with Sheriff Alex Villanueva, and he said Proposition 47 took away our stick. The stick was if people who are doing drugs, stealing to do drugs, don't have the fear of going to jail, there's nothing we can do to them. So I would urge the repeal of Proposition 47. You're quite right, the voters did pass it. I think they were misled. I think the intention was good. The idea was that people who steal often do so to support a drug habit. And rather than go to prison, they should be going to drug treatment and rehab. But without the threat of them going to prison, you can't force them to go into rehab. The way it used to be before Proposition 47 is either you go to jail or you go to rehab. Now you no longer have the threat of sending people to jail. There's also the problem of cashless bail, also supported by these two DAs in San Francisco and in Los Angeles. If somebody commits a crime and they're free without any real penalty, if they don't go to prison, if they don't show up for their court date, it turns into a warrant, and you therefore don't have the stick to make sure they show up to court and ultimately do their time. So for all those reasons, I would urge people to repeal Proposition 47 because I think the voters were misled into thinking it was going to be humane when in fact it's caused all sorts of problems. Not least of which is that people can now steal up to $950, not just every day, but at every store. And if they get caught, they get a ticket. They're not convicted felons. And so a lot of people are hurt, including a disproportionate number of stores and shops that are owned by minorities. And in the Bay Area, something like several Walgreens have been shut down and the hours have been restricted. So people working there are now being hurt as well, in addition to customers being inconvenienced. So again, I'm going to have a whole different tone there. And the tone is going to be the number one responsibility of government is to protect people and property. And in my opinion, this governor is not doing that.
Okay,
Thank you.
Kathy, thank you very much for that question. Our next question comes from Lynn Koo of KTSF in the Bay Area. Lynn, if you'll hang on just for a few seconds, you will appear on the screen very soon. And at that point, please go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, am I on mute?
Yes, no, you're not. We can all hear you. Please go ahead and ask your question, Lynn.
Hi, Larry. I have two questions.
And actually, Lynn, I'm sorry, let me interrupt you just for a second before you start. There are a lot of reporters on this call, and we thank you for your time and we thank you for joining us. Obviously, we're not going to be able to get to all of you, so we apologize in advance. And as we indicated in our media advisory yesterday, we are going to give preference in the Q&A session to media that regularly cover the topics that we are discussing today, crime, anti-Asian violence, racial preferences, and so on. So again, we apologize in advance to those of you we will not be able to get to, but we certainly are open to talking to you another time if we cannot get to you later. Lynn, please go ahead.
Sure, thank you. I do have a question regarding the crime because I know in the Asian community, a lot of people concerned about public safety. So they're asking for more policing and more patrol on the street. But on the other hand, there is a strong voice about defund police. So can you talk about what's your position versus like defund police versus more policing and the patrol? And I have second question if I'm able, if you can answer to that. You mentioned about you're going to suspend the mandatory mask and the vaccination if you are elected. And so can you talk about what's your base? Because right now the Delta variant, the virus is spreading out quickly. So how are you going to do to stop it if you suspend the mask and the vaccination mandatory policy? Thank you.
Regarding defund the police, I'm adamantly opposed to defunding the police. As I mentioned earlier, the number one responsibility of government is to protect people and property. Also, the defund the police movement has demoralized many police officers. I understand in Chicago, there are now 1,000 fewer officers than there was almost a year ago because many officers are retiring earlier or are not signing up to join the police because they feel demoralized. The former police commissioner of New York, Ray Kelly, recently said that only 7% of NYPD officers would recommend the job to a friend or to a family member. So they are demoralized by this defund the police movement. And of course, when you take more resources away from the police, you have fewer police officers, fewer patrols, crime is going to go up. Now, regarding my saying that I'm going to suspend any mask mandates or vaccine mandates when I become governor, as far as I can tell, the science is pretty clear that if you are vaccinated, you are protected against the coronavirus and also protected against the Delta variant. People have made the decision, many of them have made the decision not to take the vaccine, as I mentioned, for all sorts of reasons. Some people don't believe that it was conceived too quickly. The average vaccine takes around 5 years. Donald Trump did this in around 11 months. I said earlier that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris both said that if Donald Trump told them to take the vaccine, they would not. Some people have had an adverse reaction to a shot before. Some people have already contracted the coronavirus and feel that they have some sort of immunity to it. And I don't think the science is at all clear that young people are likely to be hospitalized, likely to die, certainly, less likely to be hospitalized. So the idea that we're requiring children to wear masks, to me is against science. And as far as school teachers are concerned, if they are concerned, they should get vaccinated. I am not going to tell what private businesses what to do. I'm talking about what I would do as a governor regarding state employees. But if a private business wants to require people to wear a mask and require people to have shots, that's a whole different thing. But at the state level, I'm not going to require any kind of public worker to wear a mask or any kind of public worker to have a vaccine. I think that's an assault on freedom. Thomas Jefferson said it's a mistake to trade freedom for public safety, and I believe he's right. I was in Palm Desert not long ago on a campaign tour, and I stopped onto a coffee shop. It wasn't a Starbucks, but it was like a Starbucks. And I noticed that some of the wait staff were wearing masks and some not. And I was waited on by a young lady who told me she was a college student. She didn't have a mask on. And I asked her what the policy was inside the store. And she said, well, my boss allows us to wear a mask or not wear a mask. And I said, have you been vaccinated? She said, no. And I said, may I ask you why? And she very politely said, she wasn't offended. She said, I don't feel like I need to give you a reason why. Well, this is America. And I don't believe the state should be telling people to wear a mask. I don't believe the state should be telling people to be vaccinated. Again, if the private sector wants to do it and wants to have that kind of policy, that's the private sector, but not the public sector.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Lynn, thank you very much. Our next question goes to US News Express. And if you could wait till your picture comes on the screen, and then if you could please unmute yourself, please go ahead and ask a question.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, and please identify yourself.
Okay, thank you very much, Larry. This is Vers Lovulo from US News Express. So I have a question about the wildfire. You know, California has wildfire, you know, take away a lot of properties, money, and also the, you know, people's lives. So, but we seem to have totally out of control. So I really want to know if you're gonna do something for this, and also what are you gonna do? And shall we, you know, the technology in Silicon Valley is so advanced that they can easily put some like detector or something to, you know, to know the heat and then to prevent, instead of, you know, send all the fire department to pour out the water, pour out the fire. So I want to know, what are you thinking about it?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that about technology. I recently was at a factory and they had invented some material that you could use with homes that are very, very fire resistant and would probably cause less damage for structures. But the primary reason we're having these problems is because of the failure to thin our forests. The logging industry is about half of what it used to be because of the anti-logging attitude that we have here in California. And many of our trees are way too thick, and many of the dry vegetation has not been cleared away. Governor Jerry Brown left a plan to clear 500,000 acres of fallen trees and dry vegetation. And from what I can tell, only a fraction of that was done. Gavin Newsom bragged about the number of millions of acreage that he had cleared away, and it turned out that he misled by a factor of 7. So I'm going to devote resources to actually thinning the forests and making sure that when we do have these fires, they're not nearly as severe and as combustible as they are. But part of the problem is this. Nearly half of all the new homes in America, let alone California, are built in areas that are wildfire prone. And as a result, we have far more people and far more structures who are at risk than before. One of the reasons for this is because building near urban areas is because it's become increasingly expensive because of the California Environmental Quality Act that we were just now talking about earlier. So there's an incentive to build in wildfire areas because it's cheaper, a disincentive to build closer into urban areas because it's more expensive because of the California Environmental Quality Act. So that plays a heavy role in this as well. Also, if you look at the management of forests that are owned by the private sector versus the state versus the feds, it's very different. People who have private property have a much greater interest in making sure the forests are thin than the public sector in the state and in federal. So again, I'm going to be doing what I should do, which is to make sure the forests are thinned as quickly as possible, and to move the dry vegetation so that when we do have these droughts, these fires, and by the way, most of them are conducted or caused by human error, whether it's a fallen power line or whether it's a spark from a muffler or whether it's a campfire. Human beings are the ones who are causing these kinds of things. And so we're going to have them no matter who's governor, but they don't have to be as combustible if the fallen trees are cleared. And the outgoing governor had a plan and the incoming governor, Gavin Newsom, promised to follow that plan and failed to do so.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next question comes from Liam Yan. And Liam, again, if you could wait for your picture to show up on the screen, unmute yourself, then please ask a question. And Liam, if you could please identify yourself, we'd appreciate it. Liam, you would need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Bing, and thank you, Betty and Larry. I've been a long time fan since the David Rubin report.
Oh, thank you very much. Could you identify yourself for those?
Oh, yeah, this is Liam Yan from U Channel Television. It's based on Bay Area. It's for Chinese audience. So we have a problem about the religious organizations' role, especially in this COVID era, because I saw a religious organization, to be more specifically, is a Christian church called River of Life. During the pandemic, we saw this church they have a foundation and a food pantry, so serve thousands of families in our community. My question is, Larry, how can religious organizations like church and the synagogue and the mosque help more in solving this lot of dire issues like homelessness, joblessness, or even education? Like, how can a state government to help this organization to do more?
Liam, let me give you a long answer. Most of us in high school read a book called Democracy in America, written by a Frenchman named Alexis de Tocqueville. It came out in around 1830 or so, when America was only 60, 65 years old. And he toured America, and he was really impressed with all of what he called mutual aid societies. These were organizations, nothing to do with government, that were set up to help people who were sick, who were homeless, who needed food. And he was impressed with the charitable spirit of America. There's another book called The Tragedy of American Compassion, written by a man named Marvin Olasky. And he was about the Great Depression. And he talked about the families that were eligible for government aid versus the families that were eligible for government aid but didn't take it. Fast forward, the families that were eligible for government aid but didn't take it recovered faster, became more self-sufficient, were more prosperous. My point is, government aid creates dependency. If you give people something without requiring anything back from them, you're not really solving the problem. That's why I'm urging churches to get involved in helping with the problem of the homelessness. And I would like government to get out of the way. The man that I mentioned, who wrote a book called Democracy in America, also wrote a book around the same time about his experience 2 years before he visited America. He had gone around Europe, and he noticed that the wealthiest country, which was England, had the greatest number of beggars in the streets. The poorer countries didn't have it. And he wondered why. And he found out that England became one of the first, if not the first, state to have government welfare. And he found that government welfare created dependency. He said he didn't really know what to do about it, what the answer was, but he knew that government did not know the answer. So nonprofits, religious organizations, these are the people that know better who the people are in the streets, what they need. And if we empowered them, our result would be a whole lot better. Again, when I say empower them, I don't mean giving them government money, because government money always comes with strings attached. Leave the money in the pockets of people. Don't tax us so much. Let us spend our money on charitable organizations. Let us spend our money on organizations that truly make a difference. I did some volunteer work for United Way years ago. And for every dollar that is donated, roughly 80, 85 cents goes down to the intended beneficiary. Far more effective, far more efficient than government. So I'm urging us to get out of the way, less government, more individuals. We're the most generous nation on the face of the earth. We give more money, we forgive more money. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, we are far more generous than any other country on the face of the earth, including all of those of Europe. And if we just allowed Americans to help other Americans, we'd be far, far better off. One of the other findings in that book called The Tragedy of American Compassion I mentioned, during the Great Depression, when 25% of adults were unemployed and nearly 50% of Black adults were unemployed, charitable giving skyrocketed. Now, after FDR got into his so-called New Deal to get us out of the Great Depression, charitable giving still went up, but not nearly as much. People felt that they gave at the office. My point is, if government got out of the way and allowed us to help other people, we would do so.
Okay, thank you, Larry, and thank you, Liam, for that question. Our next question goes to Tsingtao Daily. June Shan had asked a question via the chat function. June, I'm bringing you onto the screen. If you would prefer not to ask the question, I could also read off your question to the audience, but I see that you're now on. So
yeah, I'm on.
You could, okay,
I'm
welcome, June. Welcome, June. So please go ahead and ask your question.
Sure, thank you. Hi, Larry. This is June Shen from Tsingtao Daily. My question is the first one. Do you have a specific plan on how to save the businesses from moving out to California and keep the economic prosperous in California? And the second question is, what makes you the best candidate for the governor to replace nuisance? Thank you.
Well, June, as far as what I can do to stop businesses from leaving, there are so many things that hurt business. It's hard to know where to start. I practiced law briefly in Ohio, and I was a workers' compensation lawyer for a time. And I defended large companies against claimants who were claiming that they were owed something. The burden of proof was on the claimant to prove his or her claim. That is not the case here in California. I talked to a man who owned a number of restaurants. He was very wealthy, and the reason he was able to defend this claim is because he was very wealthy. But he found out that there was an employee who claimed that he was owed $65,000 in back wages. He found out the employee wasn't even in California when he allegedly incurred the back wages. So the employer fought the claim, and the lawyer for the claimant wanted to settle for $50,000. The employer refused. They went to court through the administrative process, and then the lawyer for the claimant wanted to settle for $25,000. The employer refused, and then the claimant said, "Okay, I'll settle it for $10,000." The employer refused. Finally, ultimately, the employer prevailed, but he ended up spending way more money than the $65,000 that this employee claimed that he was owed. And my point is, this is one of the many, many, many reasons that people cite for why it's such a business unfriendly atmosphere here in California. There's also the so-called PAGA law. That's a private attorney general law that allows people to easily form class action lawsuits and file lawsuits against employers. Also, the California Environmental Quality Act that I mentioned before, that has caused so many contractors to have projects held up for years and years and years, scaled down. I talked to a number of developers who said, for example, 20 years ago, I had a 2,000 unit development project on the boards all ready to go. I got sued. I got scaled it down to 1,000. I got sued. I scaled it down to 500. I got sued. And finally, 22 years later, a 200 unit housing development was approved, as opposed to the 2,000 one that would have been done 20 years ago. There was a project about 15 years ago called Amundsen Ranch on land in Ventura County. The land was pristine, I'll give you that, but almost all land used to be pristine. It was 9,000 housing units. It was approved by local government. In came the environmental groups. They filed lawsuits, but they were going to lose until Rob Reiner, the Hollywood personality, the producer and writer, joined in the campaign to stop this, this project. Now, unless Rob Reiner lives on a houseboat, wherever he lives at one time was pristine land as well. But he was able to successfully stop this project. 10 years later, they had a reunion and they bragged about how they were able to stop this project. And if you read the articles about the 10-year reunion, there was not one word about the fact that there were 9,000 fewer housing units available in the greater LA area because of this stoppage. Now, things are trade-offs, and people on the left, many environmentalists, don't recognize that there are costs and benefits to all of this stuff. So there are many, many rules, regulations, hindrances that cause small businesses to become much more less profitable, not least of which, by the way, is the minimum wage law. Let me just give you another story. I know I'm giving you a long answer, but the governor, the mayor of LA is Eric Garcetti. And some years ago, there was a proposal to increase the minimum wage here in Los Angeles to $12. By the way, it's now $15. And he invited a bunch of small business people in to talk about this. And I know this is true because several people who were at the business at this meeting told me. And they all brought in their profit and loss statements and told him, if you artificially jack up the number one cost, which is labor, I'm going to have to lay off people, cut people's hours, defer hiring decisions, or increase the price of my products. And Eric Garcetti listened very intently and then buttoned his coat, got up and said, I believe you can absorb the cost and sign the bill. Now, this man has never even run a hot dog stand. And here he is telling small business people who spend 60, 70, 80 hours a week, because as you know, if you run a small business, you can't run 9 to 5 if you're going to be profitable. So he's telling people that spend 60, 70, 80 hours a week, I can artificially jack up your price of labor and it's not going to have any downside. If that's true, why don't you just make the cost of labor $50 an hour? That way everybody has $100,000. There is a downside to artificially jacking up the cost of labor, and that's one of the many reasons that people struggle to make ends meet when they have their own business here in the state of California. So I'm going to be vetoing all kinds of job-killing bills, including, had I been governor, I would have vetoed AB 5. That's the bill that made independent contractors now full-time employees, entitled to all sorts of benefits. So a lot of independent contractors, many of whom are disabled, ended up losing their jobs. So I'm going to be stopping these job-killing kinds of bills that has caused people for the very first time, as I mentioned in our nation's history, to leave California. There's a magazine called CEO Magazine. It's been around 17 years. And for 17 years, they asked CEOs, which is the best state in which to do business, which is the worst, based upon taxes, based upon spending, based upon the power of the public sector unions, based on things like unfunded pension liabilities, based upon whether or not there's a business-friendly or a business-unfriendly atmosphere. And for 17 consecutive years, California has been determined to be the worst state in which to do business by these CEOs. That you're going to have a very different attitude in Sacramento when I get there.
Okay.
Thank you, Larry. My second question is,
Sorry.
among the
Yeah.
46 candidates,
Judith, if you could please make it quick. I know we started a little bit behind schedule.
yeah,
So your next question will be our last question.
June, I remember your question.
thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, among the 46 candidates or more, what makes you the best one to replace Newsom? Thank you.
Well, I've got good judgment. I've got common sense. I've got very high name recognition in California. I think only second to Caitlyn Jenner. And it's not just about name recognition. It's about whether or not I've been talking about these issues of crime and of homelessness and the rising cost of living. And I have for about 27 years. I've written a column once a week since April of 1998 where I discuss these issues. So I think I've thought them through. I think I've got the ability to explain things to regular Californians in ways that they can understand. I think I can break through and also get some independents and some rational Democrats on my side as well. I'm a native Californian. My father came here in 1947. He worked 2 full-time jobs cleaning toilets, was able to save his nickels and dimes to purchase a house right now in South Central Los Angeles that is now worth $600,000. And on his salary, he had a stay-at-home mom, my mother, and she was able to stay at home until the youngest of us, my little brother, was in middle school. And my point is that route from poverty to the middle class is now shut down because of the high cost of living in California, largely driven by the environmental extremists that do not want growth. I'm able to talk about how California used to be. I can talk about my father's story. I can talk about the outrageous cost of living. And I have, I think, practical ideas about what to do with it. I don't have horns. I don't have tails. I like people. I'm not anti-Democrat. I don't think this is an anti-Democrat thing. My mother was a Democrat. My brother was a Democrat. This is an anti-Gavin Newsom thing because of his incompetence and failure to do the number one thing that government's supposed to do, and that is protect people and property, and his failure to deal with the homelessness, and the way he hypocritically shut down this government while sitting up there, as I've mentioned, ignoring the very mandates that he was putting down the throats of the American people. I think I can make the case, once I clear my throat, I think I can make the case better than the rest of the 40 some odd people on the Republican side. That's why I think I'm your person to become the next governor of California.
Okay, thank you. June, thank you very much for your questions. That was our last question. Before we wrap up, we do want to ask Betty if she would like to make any final comments. Betty, you'll have to unmute yourself, please.
Larry, as the former mayor of the city of Monterey Park, I understand how competency and the ability to convey your ideas to a staff of people to carry out the policies that you implement is so important. And I believe that you have those qualities, Larry. And I wanted to retire for many years. And I started retiring after November, and was very disappointed in the candidates that had already announced. And I am fully on board with you, Larry. I am not a paid volunteer. And I've only met Larry once before I started to support him in this campaign. You are the best. We don't have time for 29-year-old individuals to get up to par in governing this state. We don't have time for people who have not known the issues for 27 to 30 years. It is time that we unite together, the community in California, regardless of your party preferences, regardless of your gender identity, your race, and your religion. We now need to have Gavin Newsom do his constitutional duty to uphold the laws of California. Once we do that, everything else will come together. I believe in you, and I know that the events that I have attended, Larry, you are our Save the California candidate. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. Larry, do you have any final comments before we end this press conference?
I do. I'd like to say one more thing. Again, Betty, thank you so much for that ringing endorsement. I really do appreciate it. One of the reasons, in my opinion, that Arnold Schwarzenegger failed when he became governor and moved to the left is because he was used to being loved. He was used to having adulation. I'm not used to that at all. I've been called an Uncle Tom and a sellout and all sorts of nasty things for a very long period of time. And I'm not going up there to make friends. I'm going up there to change things. I'm also not afraid to tell the truth. I'm not afraid to call out the left-wing media for their own bias. I remember back in 2006, there was a group of 3 young white girls who attended a Halloween party in Long Beach. They were attacked by a mob of around 20 or 30 blacks. A black Good Samaritan was driving by and waded into the mob. And had he not been there, who knows what would happen to those girls, but they were attacked viciously. The LA Times headquarters is just 20 miles away from Long Beach. They did not write one word about this vicious assault on these 3 white girls for almost an entire week. Because they didn't want to make it look as if black people were doing something bad. We can't solve a problem unless we tell the truth. And so I'm going to go up there and tell the truth about what's going on in California. I'm going to go up there I'm not going up there to make friends. I'm going up there to tell these lawmakers they need to do their constitutional duty and to protect people and property. And I'm not going up there to be loved. So if people think I'm going to go up there and do what Arnold Schwarzenegger did and run into some resistance and all of a sudden cave, think again. That's not going to happen with me.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Go to electelder.com for more information on Recall Newsom Elect Elder. And for those of you who wanted to ask a question and that we didn't get to, again, we apologize. I do know that there are a number of you on this call that we've talked to multiple times. Our goal in this campaign is to talk to as many people in the state as possible and to reach as many communities as possible. A number of the media here who asked questions today have not actually been able to ask a question of Larry in this campaign. And obviously many of the issues we covered today affect their communities more than others. We will have more press conferences coming up later on in the weeks to come, and we look forward to talking to everybody again. Thank you all for attending today. And thank you, Larry and Betty.
Thank you, Betty.
Thank you, and let's win.